Thank you for coming. My name is Anna Ginden. I'm the Director of Programming here at Adat Israel Congregation. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Jesse Brown, who is going to be our guest speaker tonight. Jesse Brown is the founder and publisher of Canadaland, the first and largest podcast network in Canada. He's the winner of the Hillman Prize for Investigative Reporting and the National Magazine Award for Humor. Canadaland's podcasts have won gold awards from the Signal Awards and from the Digital Publishing Awards. As a journalist, Jesse focuses on the Canadian media, providing reporting and analysis of what the news media gets wrong and what it does right. After October 7th, he began documenting news coverage of anti-Semitism in Canada. His reporting on this topic has been met with a great deal of resistance, controversy, and also questions about Jesse's loyalties. He addresses these issues in a widely shared editorial titled, "Is Jesse a Zionist?" Our senior rabbi, Rabbi Adam Cutler, who unfortunately is not with us tonight, he's mourning the loss of his father, Zichrono Livracha, heard this piece and invited Jesse to our congregation to share with you his work on anti-Semitism in the Canadian media and to share with you his personal experience in documenting this topic as a journalist. Please join me in welcoming Jesse Brown.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that warm introduction. Thank you very much for having me here. I speak for a living. I speak on my podcast. Sometimes I speak in front of audiences. I don't think I've spoken before an audience of Jews since my bar mitzvah. Being Jewish is, it's a significant part of who I am, but it's never been a significant part of who I am publicly. My choice has been to mostly consider myself a Jew in a personal realm, something that I mostly experience with family. I never imagined that it was too interesting to my audience, and it's not something I hid. If it came up naturally, I'd discuss it. But it didn't come up that often until October 7th. After October 7th, it felt like the world shifted on its axis. I think that's probably a familiar feeling. It felt like something very personal was wrenched from that personal sphere, from that private sphere, and placed in the middle of the town square for everyone to debate and discuss, criticize, judge, condemn, demand condemnations from. And it was an end for me of a certain way of being Jewish. But it did occur to me that the way in which I lived my Judaism on my own terms, when and how I felt like it, was a tremendous privilege, a tremendous luxury and privilege, and one that Jewish people very rarely were able to enjoy. And I've tried to be equal to that shift. And I began having conversations in public and being Jewish in public, uncomfortably, awkwardly, controversially. And I also began to have imaginary conversations in my head with other Jewish people about what it means now to be Jewish. There are so many people right now who are claiming to speak for us, people who are speaking about us, people who are speaking over us, people who are claiming to represent us. I think it's crucial that we speak for ourselves. I don't speak for anyone but myself. I don't represent anyone but myself. And anyone could be here sharing thoughts, so it's not lost on me the privilege of being asked to come and share those thoughts with you. So thank you very much for that. And there's another reason why it's deeply meaningful for me to be here in this particular congregation. A family connection that I have to this congregation that I've only recently learned about. I'll share it with you. Some of you may recognize your Rabbi Emeritus, Erwin Shield, and this is a picture of him on his wedding day, looking pretty dapper. The other picture, that's my great uncle, Eric Exton. when he was a private in the Canadian Army. You have two Jewish men here starting their lives in Canada after fleeing the Nazis. And that's a story that I was familiar with. It's a familiar story for a lot of people. But that story skips a chapter. The connection between these two men is that they met each other in the hold of a ship called the SS Ettrick. Some of you may know this story. Both Eric Exton and Rabbi Shield wrote about it. This was a ship that brought hundreds of Jews of German and Austrian origin from Europe to Canada in 1940. It also brought Nazis. There were Nazi prisoners of war on that ship. And in keeping with the Geneva Convention, those Nazis had to be treated according to their rank and station. So there were Nazi officers enjoying very comfortable quarters and cabins on the top deck of the ship. And then there were hundreds of Jews enduring deplorable conditions in the hold of the ship. And that is where your rabbi met my future great uncle. It was an incredible group of Jews on the Ettrick. There were future Nobel Prize winners. There were Jews on that ship who conducted symphonies, people who played with Glenn Gould, future members of the Order of Canada, your future rabbi, my future great uncle, who would go on to be a businessman and philanthropist. Now, when they arrived in Canada, they did not begin their lives in this place of salvation and refuge. They were sent to, well, they were concentrated in a camp, in an internment camp. My great uncle was sent to Camp N in Sherbrooke, where a Jew tried to escape and was shot. Can you imagine that? Escaping the Nazis and enduring that voyage only to be shot dead by a Canadian soldier. When I learned about this, it sat really heavily with me, and it complicated my understanding of this country that we live in and our place of acceptance within it. How could this have happened? And I investigated that the way that I investigate things, by looking at what's in the media. And what was in the media back then was a lot of anger and fear. Canada had recently entered the war, and there was a lot of rage and anger towards Nazis, understandably. There was a position of complete moral clarity of good and evil, of a foreign threat, foreign enemy that everyone needed to get together against. And in that atmosphere came these refugees with German accents, Austrian accents. It was not anti-Semitism that inspired Canada to imprison them as suspected Nazis, where they were called enemy aliens. There was plenty of anti-Semitism in Canada, but that's not why this happened. This happened because of anger and fear and ignorance. Canadians could not tell the difference between Nazis and Jews. That's what happened then, and that is what is happening now. I'm going to talk about what's in the media now. Before I do, I'm going to add a little bit to the context that was shared with you. I run this company called Canadaland, and we focus on Canada, obviously, and specifically the Canadian media. You will read me referred to in the Canadian press as Canada's self-appointed media critic. This is true. Nobody hired me to do this job. I hired myself. But I have a terrific eye for talent. The real reason why I'm able to do this work is because over 10 years of covering the media, Canadaland has inspired a number of people to support us with monthly paid subscriptions. And that keeps about 20 of us doing this kind of journalism. From the beginning, one of the things that Canadaland focused on was racism in the press. Racism is a difficult thing to document. Racism is hard to pin down. Nobody says, yes, I was being racist. Very rarely does that happen. Somebody feels that something was racist and somebody else says you're being too sensitive. How do you document it? The news is about facts. How do you create a factual record of whether or not racism occurred? It can be done. We've gotten pretty good at it. The best way to do it, I have found, is looking for double standards. The classic double standard in media reporting, I suppose, being the way in which newspapers used to report crimes. The suspect is a male, 5'10", wearing a hooded sweatshirt, black. Then you would read, the suspect is a male, 5'10", wearing a hooded sweatshirt. And that would be it. It's a great example because the person who wrote that news story might not have intended any racism. They may have been just writing it the way that everybody else had been writing it. But a media reporter, a media critic, a media analyst could come and say, I have looked at the last 1,000 reports on arrests. Why do you only identify the race when the suspect is black? This is discriminatory. This is adding to a conception that black people are criminals, and you don't mention the race with other people. So you can create a factual record of racism, and you can report it. And that's what we've done. And for the first 10 years of Canadaland, most likely you would find us reporting on Islamophobia when we found it in newspapers, and anti-Indigenous bias in the press. And you could look at a lot of things. You could look at which voices were sought for comment. You could look at who gets to talk for people. You could look at what is said about people and then compare it to how other groups are covered. And you could find racism, and we did. So that's what we did for a good 10 years. And then after October 7th, I started to notice double standards when it came to the ways in which Jews were covered and anti-Semitism was covered. And I started to report it. And the response was very different. We can get to that a bit later. I'm going to go over some of the coverage, and I'm going to talk about some of the issues that I've taken with it. I think we're all familiar with stories like this. The focus has been on the protests. The focus, of course, on what's going on in the Middle East, but when we talk about Canadian coverage of what's happening in Canada, the news media has given daily, beat-by-beat coverage of the protests. Now, protests are made to be covered. That's why people protest. They are publicity-seeking events. And the way that you cover a protest, you can send a very young reporter to a protest. They go to the protest, they write down the facts. How many people were there? What did the signs say? Get some quotes from the people who are protesting. What did the police say? Did anyone get violent? Were there any arrests made? Were there any counter-protesters? Get both sides of the story, go home, file a news story, it's balanced, you're good. And so we have had a lot of coverage of the protests like this, and there's been a specific focus on what these chants mean. What do these words mean, the media asks. So, we've seen this many times. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What does that mean? And so the reporter asks the protester, and they say it means what it says. What do you mean? It means that people should be free. How could you disagree with that? Of course people should be free. And of course they are not free right now. And then a Jew will be quoted. Often a community leader, maybe somebody from CIJA or B'nai B'rith, maybe a counter-protester. And they'll say, okay, there's a river. It's the Jordan River. There's a sea, it's the Mediterranean Sea, and all of Israel, Palestine, what have you, exists between those two bodies of water. And when they say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, what they mean is that Palestine is all the land. They're saying that they want one state. There's no two-state solution suggested by that. And it raises certain concerns we have about what you do with all the Jews there. So we consider that to be anti-Semitic. But that's not going to get quoted in full. There will be a sentence or two usually quoted, and the sentence will be, we consider that anti-Semitism. And so it's he said, she said. We're saying that people should be free. We're saying we consider it anti-Semitic. And all of this is happening in the context of some of the most gruesome, ghastly documentation of human death and destruction that people are ingesting on a daily basis from Gaza. So the newsreader is left to come up to their own conclusions about this. The media won't pass judgment. Is it anti-Semitic or not? The jury is out. There is only one solution: Intifada revolution. Well, what does that mean? What does Intifada mean? If you ask a protester, the protester will say Intifada means uprising. Look it up, that's what it means. And that's true. If you ask a Jew what Intifada means, they'll say, well, we lived through a couple Intifadas, and we have a different experience of what that means. And when you say there is only one solution that has a specific meaning to us. And when you say globalize the Intifada, that has a specific meaning to us, and we do consider these things anti-Semitic. And some portion of that will be quoted, and the newsreader is left to determine, well, maybe it's anti-Semitic, maybe it isn't. Seems a bit ambiguous. When a protest meanders down University, and this gentleman, Spider-Man for Palestine, climbs on the awning of the one Jewish building, Mount Sinai Hospital, and breaks a line that has existed with protests, to protest, to chant at a hospital, place of healing, place of medicine. And this seems to Jews who are quoted as an obvious act of anti-Semitism. But if you ask Spider-Man for Palestine, who was quoted, though he is masked, he was quoted as a source on this, was this anti-Semitic? And he says, no. I just randomly chose to climb up there. I won't do it again. And we have quotes from leaders of the protest. Here is Dalia Awad, who is an organizer for one of the main organizing groups, Palestinian Youth Movement. And she agrees that this is ridiculous, these allegations of anti-Semitism. And it's very frustrating for Jews who feel like they know exactly what they are seeing. The term is gaslighting. It can feel like we are being gaslit constantly. These stories appear again and again. Here's another one where the retail outlet Indigo, this chain of bookstores, was vandalized. And the picture of the Jewish owner, Heather Eisman, was plastered over the front of her own store with the words "funding genocide," with a reference to her Heseg charity, which sends money to IDF soldiers. And it was sprayed with blood red paint. And to a lot of Jews, this evoked nothing but this, Kristallnacht. It would have probably evoked that regardless, but it happened to have occurred on the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht, which is the pogrom, the night of broken glass, when Jewish storefronts were vandalized and windows were smashed and Jews were killed, and the Holocaust began, and no Jew was safe in Europe after that. And this is so obvious from a Jewish perspective of what you are looking at. And it did not occur to me for a moment. It didn't matter to me what was the intent. Did they know? Because I've been covering racism, and I know that when we cover racism, and the discourse around anti-racism is that it is the impact of racism that matters. It is not the intent. And the impact was clear. Jews were saying this very clearly. That is anti-Semitic to us. There is no question. Well, the CBC said that it's a debate. This is a debate. The vandalism sparks a debate over the definition of anti-Semitism. There's no consensus, says their expert. What is this anti-Semitism? Who's to say? It's a vibe. It's a feeling. Some people have it, some people don't. Can we say when racism occurs? Is racism a fact? Does anti-Semitism exist? Well, again, we document this by looking for the double standard. The vandalism at Indigo struck me as just as much an assault on Jewish safety and well-being, just as much of an obvious use of violent symbolism as hanging a noose outside of a business where black people work. Well, that's happened. Let's see how that was covered. The Toronto Star had no question about this. It was racism. Racism is not in scare quotes when a noose was hung outside of a construction site. It was racism. Everybody knows that, and if you didn't know that, you should have. They were unequivocal about this, as they should be. Tying a noose isn't just a symbol of hatred, it's an act of terror, wrote the Toronto Star. Here's what the Toronto Star had to say about the Indigo event. First, we have the Toronto Star's racial justice columnist. The first comment was with reference to Trudeau being exposed to have appeared in blackface. She said, as she said many times, I can't get with this idea he didn't intend any harm, Trudeau, by wearing blackface, therefore it's okay. That's just not okay when we know racism is not about intent. Let's not pretend that it wasn't racist. Racism exists, and this was racism. Here's what she said about the Indigo vandalism. there is no evidence that Reisman was targeted for being Jewish. Is a swastika anti-Semitic? Can we say that for a fact? I don't know. But it leaves Jews feeling unsafe. And here I'm going to take you through another genre of article that we have seen again and again. Not an article about what the facts are, an article almost as a concession to what the media has been hearing from the Jewish community. Well, we can't say for a fact that this was racism, but if you say you're unsafe, that you feel unsafe, we'll report that you feel unsafe. At North York meeting, members of Jewish community express fear over protests. Jews are afraid, is the news story. We feel isolated, we feel scared, what life is like for Canadian Jews after Hamas attack. Jewish students testify that they feel unsafe on Canadian university campuses, with some of them hiring private security because they feel unsafe. Again, some Jewish Canadians say that Passover comes with solemnity and complex emotions. This is a very strange news story. Canada's Jewish community feels like it is under assault. It goes on and on. I've edited down the list somewhat. And when you repeat something enough times, it becomes sort of the way that we talk about it, and it filters up to the Prime Minister. It's not right, said the Prime Minister, that Jewish people feel unsafe in Canada. I want to suggest that the news media is doing us no great favors with this endless coverage of Jewish feelings of anxiety, feelings of unsafety. It's asking the public to sympathize with these Jews and their feelings, at the same time when people are ingesting a daily torrent of the most horrific images from Gaza. And it's almost as if the news media is daring the public to compare things that I don't know what they have to do with each other. But the bait is taken every time. Unsafe, fear, the Jews feel unsafe. You know who is unsafe? Palestinian children. You know who is unsafe? Gazans. And it's not just random accounts on Twitter saying these things. Here's Avi Lewis. I'm a Jew and I feel pretty safe. Well, that's good for Avi. What makes him feel unsafe is Israel's murder of Palestinian civilians and attacks from other Jews. And he knows what they're intended for. He knows the intention of these other Jews. They're trying to silence him and everyone. The Toronto Star put out a podcast in which the host of the podcast spoke with a reporter about Jewish feelings. Even the idea that we feel unsafe was challenged. Do these Jews really feel unsafe? Neither of these women are Jewish. Maybe they just feel uncomfortable. These are very privileged people. And the protests, the encampments, maybe it's just making them feel uncomfortable and they're confusing their unfamiliar feeling of discomfort with being unsafe. They agree that that's probably the case. And here we have Janelle Massa, a former CBC anchor, saying, this is a great conversation. I cannot imagine what would happen if I had a podcast where I discussed the feelings of Muslim women without any Muslim women present, and came to conclusions that the way that they're presenting their feelings, that's not how they really feel. So we look for the double standard. And then we arrive at the question, what is the truth of this? Is this just about a bunch of anxious Jews feeling unsafe, so unsafe that they have to hire private security to go to school, which really reinforces some pretty basic stereotypes about what Jewish people are like? Is this just a Jewish anxiety, a feeling, or are Jews actually unsafe? That might be a question that the media could ask. Are Jews actually unsafe? So are we? Well, if you happen to be at Edmonton City Hall last January, where this individual attacked with Molotov cocktails and assault rifle in the name of Gaza, you were not safe. If you were at a Jewish girls' school in Toronto just a few days ago, when gunshots were fired at the window in the middle of the night, that was not a safe place to be. If you were at this Jewish deli when the words "Free Palestine" were written on the front of it and it was burned from within, somebody threw in some sort of explosive and it burned, you would not have been safe. If you were this Israeli Jewish high schooler who was beaten up in Fredericton by a classmate, was caught on video, she was attacked from behind by a classmate who happened to be Muslim and who, this girl alleges, accused her of some sort of culpability for what was happening in Gaza, this teenager in Fredericton. She was viciously beaten. She is not safe. If you live in Ottawa and didn't know that there was a 15-year-old boy conspiring with another minor on some sort of terrorist plot, which the media has not told us about because we have very strict laws about reporting on what minors do, or if you happen to be in the parts of Canada where 3 other people were arrested for plotting terrorist violence since October 7th against Jews, you are not safe. And this goes on and on. We know about the Molotov cocktails and the gunshots fired at synagogues and Jewish community centers and Jewish schools. I have been reporting on these things, and every time I do, people say, well, you're cherry picking, it's a handful of incidents. This is an edited list, and that's slide 1 of 3. I don't have time to read all of these, but it's been going on since October 7th, again and again. And it's vicious, it is not speech, and they keep coming back. If you send your kids to the Jewish school in Montreal where somebody showed up and fired shots at it, I don't think they were trying to kill anybody, they were trying to scare people, and you had the courage and the bravery to send your kids there, say, I will not be intimidated, and you sent your kids back to school the next day, well, they came back to that school and they shot it up again. Here in Toronto, the Kehila Sharit synagogue has windows smashed twice. In between those attacks, they came and threw a dead raccoon in the parking lot. This is not normal. This is not feelings. These are people who want us to live in terror all the time. It doesn't take much. Rabbis receiving death threats, genocidal threats, threats of specific violence against people, and a handful of incidents where people actually have been assaulted. It doesn't take much to destroy your sense of safety and well-being, because your actual safety and well-being is being destroyed. Let me ask you, did everyone here know about all these incidents, or were there some of these incidents that were news to you? Did you know about all of them? Okay. I'm hearing a lot of no, I didn't know all of them. I heard about most of them. These were not well-reported events. Some of them were not reported on at all. And when they are reported, I want to show you what happens. Here's how the burning of a Jewish deli was reported. This was the first story. It's fairly banal. North York fire being investigated. No injuries reported. And I have to go elsewhere, and I see from other people on Twitter, that's a Jewish deli. And I don't know, I was tweeting at the CBC, why can't you say it's a Jewish deli? Other people were tweeting at the CBC. Then they use a photograph that's a little bit more dramatic, and now it says in the deck, the headline still doesn't mention the word Jew, but the deck, which is the sort of secondary, the subheading, words free Palestine were spray painted across rear doors next to where fire located. It's a very strange sentence. And then finally, they deigned to use the J word. Ontario Fire Marshal investigating early morning fire at Jewish-owned business in North York. I don't understand this reluctance to use the word Jew or Jewish. The case in Edmonton could have been a lot worse. A lot of people heard about the attack on Edmonton City Hall, but a lot of people don't know why it happened, because this was the type of headline we saw. Man arrested after firing shots, starting fire. Oh, he fired shots and he started a fire. Was he making s'mores? I don't understand what that means. Man facing 6 charges after shots fired. Molotov cocktail, so he firebombed it. But why did he do it? The CBC doesn't tell us here. Heavily armed suspect acted alone in Edmonton City Hall shooting, says Global News. He acted alone. Why did he do it? It took me about 5 minutes to find the video that he posted telling the world why he did it. It's a rant by a person who is unwell. He mentions many, many factors, and twice he brings up Gaza. He says, we must rise up to put a stop to this genocide that's going on in Gaza and throughout the world. This was an act of terrorism. Many people could have died. There were kids on a field trip to City Hall that day. Thank God he was stopped before he killed anybody. And he told us why he did it. He did it on behalf of Gaza. Even when the RCMP laid terrorism charges against him, the CBC headline does not tell us what sort of terrorist was he. Was he an eco-terrorist? For some reason, the public is not told this information. There is an incredible reluctance to tell people that anti-Semitism in Canada is a fact, and it's a fact that is happening with an extremity and a frequency that it has never happened before. And then we get to the next question, because when you say these things, there's a way in which what you say is resisted. At first, people will call you a liar. It didn't happen at all. That didn't happen. I've seen footage of somebody verbally assaulting a Jewish woman on a subway car, and a Jewish guy actually said, he's not calling them Jews, he's calling them goofs. And then another video came out and he said it again, and this time it was a bit clearer. It was very strange. These anti-Semites have these defenders who really want to tell everyone it's not true what you're hearing about this anti-Semitism. So first they'll tell you that it's not really happening. They'll ascribe motives to you. They'll say, you're just trying to distract us from what Israel is doing in Gaza. I am not a spokesperson for Israel. I don't defend Israel, nor do I condemn Israel, because I'm a journalist who doesn't take a position on things I don't cover. I've never taken a position on Putin. I cover Canada. So it's very strange when I'm accused of being a person who is on a propaganda campaign on behalf of a political agenda and ideology that I have no connection or association with. But I've been accused of that many thousands of times, of loving genocide. There's an interesting double standard there as well, because it comes from people who tell us again and again, criticism of Israel is not criticism of Jews. I think that's true. I think Israelis are pretty good at criticizing Israel without criticizing Jews. I think you need to be able to criticize Israel without criticizing Jews. But that means that the inverse is also true, that you can say positive things about Jews or things in defense of Jews against racism, and that does not mean that you are saying positive things about Israel. But that double standard is applied every day. When you get past that and it's clear that this is anti-Semitism, the next thing you'll hear is that, well, how do we know Jews didn't do this to themselves? I'm serious. This is a very widely held conspiracy theory, and there are disgusting cartoons of rabbis painting swastikas on their own synagogues. People believe that this is what's happening. The Jews are doing this to engender sympathy from people. And when you get past that, what you'll hear is, okay, it is anti-Semitism, you're not lying. It wasn't done by a Jew, there's no reason to believe that. But what does this have to do with the protests? Why are you trying to paint the protests in this anti-Semitic light? What do the protests have to do with the gunshots and the fire bombings and the threats? The protests are peace protests, they are ceasefire protests. So, let's look at how the media deals with that. Why, the media asks, why is this protest happening? It was around the corner from here, on a bridge 5 blocks away from where I grew up. They came and they asked the protesters, why did you choose this bridge? Why are you protesting here in Armour Heights? And the protesters said, we're protesting here because it's a well-trafficked area. A lot of people come here. If you spend a few minutes online, you will see video of Naved Awan, who is a fixture at the protest, explaining exactly why he chose this area. He calls it a Zionist-infested area. I don't know of any Israeli consulate or Zionist organizations in the neighborhood that I grew up in. I do know that there are a lot of Jewish residences, a lot of Jewish homes, and the language of infestation, if you know anything about anti-Semitism, will be noteworthy. But the media approaches these things as if newly hatched out of an egg. Who's to say? The same media that was so curious, what do those chants mean from the river to the sea? It's open to interpretation. Different people say different things. It's not necessarily about genocide. Some people say that. Some people just say it's about freedom. They were curious about that once. Well, the protests have evolved, and the chanting has evolved. One chant you'll hear now is, "From water to water, Palestine is Arab. We don't want to see a single Zionist." If your question was, are these genocidal chants? I think you have an answer. This has not really been covered. If you want to know what the protests are actually about, why not look at the organizers? I remember during the Freedom Trucker convoy, the media was all over the organizers. I know some of their names. We read their memorandum of understanding. We went through their social media histories. We wanted to know, even as the people who attended, and I think this is a totally legitimate thing to say, the people who attended said, well, we don't know about the organizers. We don't know about the organizers' crazy ramblings on social media. We showed up for different reasons. And I think the same is true for some people at these protests. But the media was very interested in the organizers. Are they interested in these organizers? Palestine Youth Movement, one of the main organizers, openly celebrated October 7th. They handed out candies. This is what they posted. They said, "We call on our people to uplift and honor our resistance and our martyrs. Come to Nathan Phillips Square and celebrate our steps closer to liberation." That was with reference, that was, you could see, it's on October 9th. This is a group that supports Hamas. This is no investigative journalism. They are telling us this about themselves. They are posting pictures of protesters with Hamas placards. What you see there, the red triangle, that is used by Hamas to indicate their next target. I've had those affixed to my head. And there you see a hero of Hamas, Abu Obaida, who's showing up on all kinds of stylish hoodies and posters and things like that. So that's Palestine Youth Movement. And yet, the media will have a representative from Palestinian Youth Movement on to talk about how they are not anti-Semitic. I don't mind. A lot of people say we should never put these people on the air. Don't platform them. I don't mind. I want to hear from them. This is happening. I want to know who we're dealing with. But to put them on the air and not tell your audience who they are and what they support, what they have told us they support, I don't know how that passes any kind of journalistic standard. Another group organizing is Toronto for Palestine. Toronto for Palestine, shortly after October 7th, posted this. They said, honest people must ask themselves, why is the Jewish occupation, they didn't say Israelis, they said, why is the Jewish occupation lying about many of the barbaric actions that took place on Saturday, on October 7th? They accused Jews of lying about what happened when Hamas attacked. They are using these made-up acts of cruelty and barbarism to tell the world a mini Holocaust just happened to them again. Is it possible that if they are lying about these events and creating a false genocide, it is likely they may have lied about certain details of a previous big genocide that may have occurred? It is very clearly Holocaust denial. They ludicrously claim that this is not about the Holocaust. They were talking about the Nakba. After this blew up online and they were accused of Holocaust denial, that was their alibi. They removed the statement nonetheless, I think when they realized that they had revealed themselves. Another group is Montreal for Palestine. Montreal for Palestine is run by this guy who, you can see him delivering a speech outside of a synagogue, and he's directing his comments, pure poison, to a group of counter-protesters, Jews. And you really get some insight into this guy's worldview. He's got some strange ideas. He accuses the Jews of colonizing Germany. He says, yo, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live, but not for long. Samadun is another group organizing these protests. There again you see the Hamas red triangle, and you see an assault rifle being fired. This is at the peace rally. Samadun is listed as a terrorist group in Germany and Israel. Here it is a legal nonprofit, though it has proven connections to the Palestine Liberation Front, which is designated a terrorist organization. They're not trying to hide these things anymore. The Hezbollah flags, the Hamas flags, the glorification of martyrs, the glorification of Hamas heroes is out in the open, in the encampments and at the protests. If you care to know what they stand for, they will tell you. but it's just free speech, I suppose, right? What does this have to do with that? What does this glorification of armed resistance have to do with this man who actually took it upon himself to assault Edmonton City Hall with a rifle? I think that we know from history what these things have to do with each other. We know what happens when you feed people a steady diet of hatred at a time when people are being filled with moral disgust for what a foreign government is doing. We are being scapegoated for it, and we are being made vulnerable and unsafe at these protests. The RCMP know that. They've warned about a spike in online extremism among Canadian youth. What sort of online extremism? CP24 story doesn't say. But we know. I want to be clear about something, because I have been accused so many times of trying to suggest that just because I found this evidence of anti-Semitism at the protest, or that person wore a Hamas patch, I'm trying to paint the entire protest with one brush. I'm not. I take great hope and comfort in my suspicion, my hope, that most people who attend these protests don't know who they are linking arms with. I do believe that some of them are there for good reasons. I don't think it's wrong to see images of children being killed, of war and destruction, and saying, look, this is a complicated situation. I don't know all the answers, but I just want it to stop. And I'm going to raise my voice and say, stop. But we know from history how quickly things happen. You know the parable about the frog being boiled alive so slowly that it doesn't realize it's being boiled alive? That doesn't apply here. That's what's happening to us, to Jews. But Nazification, radicalization happens very quickly. You show up with an intention to yell, ceasefire, ceasefire, and the next chant is, there is only one solution, Intifada revolution. Pretty soon you are chanting against Zionism. Did you intend to take a position against Zionism? Some did. Some came for peace. But in a split second, I saw it happen early on, when a protest was called for Chrystia Freeland's office, which is exactly an appropriate place to protest. But Chrystia Freeland's office is kitty corner to my local JCC. There's a daycare there. There's a weekend Jewish school there. It's a place of worship. It's a community center. It's a place for children. In a split second, protesters realized that they were standing in front of a Jewish building. And some of them directed their chants and their anger towards Jews. Not Israel, not Canada, but Jews. It happens that quickly. And once people cross that line, it can be very hard for them to acknowledge what they've done and step back from it and say, that was too far, I'm sorry, that was wrong. They're dug in, and there is a passion of being a member of a crowd and being filled with moral righteousness, that you're on the side of the angels. I mean, people are never so dangerous as when they think they are absolutely right, or when they think that they are saving children. Where is the media in this? I've told you about how the media is doing Jews a disservice in forgetting everything that was ever known about anti-Semitism being real. I've told you about how the media is doing a disservice in focusing on these protests day in and day out, when the biggest story in Canada, from my perspective, is obviously what is happening to this community. Where is the media? Well, every now and then we get one of these. This is a cartoon published by La Presse, but it's very similar to a cartoon that was once published in Der Stürmer. I don't care, you can make as many cartoons about Netanyahu as you want, he's fair game. But when you depict him as a blood-sucking vampire, you are playing with some of the grossest, most vicious tropes against Jews that have ever existed. Ignorance is not any excuse for this. When we see lampposts around Toronto bringing back these caricatures, Nazi-era caricatures, and then we see in the Toronto Sun Zelensky depicted looking pretty similarly, the media does us no favors. Sometimes it's very explicit. This is the last example I'm going to share. This is Omar Sashadina. He is the anchor of CTV News, which is for a long time, I think, still the most popular nightly newscast in Canada. And when he was reporting on what was going on in Ottawa a few months back, he was reporting on a rally. And I know a lot of people who went to this rally. I know Jews who went to this rally to show solidarity with family in Israel, to let people in Israel know they're not alone, we haven't forgotten them. I know Jews who went to this rally to call for the hostages to be released. I know Jews who went to this rally, maybe for the same reason some of you came here tonight, because we just want to be around other Jews right now. I don't know any Jews who went to that rally because they love war. But that's what he said on the news. Omar Sashadina said that that was a pro-war rally. And when he did that, he was saying to anyone who has been watching these ghastly images out of Gaza, do you want to know who likes this? Do you want to know who is fighting for more of this? It's these Jews. It's your neighbors. Anyone can misspeak. I've misspoken on a broadcast. You correct. Corrections were demanded. They were not given. We can only conclude that this is what he feels. This is his position. And as the chief personality associated with CTV News, this is CTV's position. He put us in danger. I feel like something has shifted beyond the scope of the world that I'm describing, the world of what's in the papers and what's in the protests and these, not dozens anymore, but hundreds of incidents of violence. As bad as that is, I feel like something has shifted in a larger sense than that, in how people look at us and what it means to be Jewish. There was a comedy show, and Ilana Glazer, she's from that show, Broad City. Great show. I don't know if you've ever seen it. She's very funny. She came to Toronto, and she had an opening act. And the opening comedian was joking around about being Jewish, the way that stand-up comedians do. And the joke was, I'm Jewish, but I'm ceasefire Jewish. It didn't really get a laugh. It got what's called clapter, when people are like agreeing with the joke more than they are laughing at the joke. Whatever, it's a joke. What does it tell us? I think that Jews, for hundreds of years, have been working on a project of, bit by bit, gaining acceptance in societies like ours to a point where the question, is it okay to be Jewish, is met with the answer, of course. And a year ago, I think that that would have been the answer. If you were presenting yourself in front of an audience at a comedy show, you could just joke about being Jewish. It didn't need any qualifiers. It didn't need to be mitigated. Yes, I'm Jewish, but I'm not that kind of Jew. I'm a ceasefire Jew. The question, is it okay to be Jewish? The answer is now, well, it depends. I don't think that we can accept that. I don't think we have to. I think that we have to speak back. These voices that claim to represent us, these voices that claim to represent our points of view, people who are talking over us, there are stories that are being missed. I know personally of more than a few Jews who have left news organizations because they have felt that the environment became toxic, they felt that they were pushed out, they felt that the only principled thing to do was to leave. I can't argue with that if that's what they felt for themselves, but it left those newsrooms, this stereotype of Jewish-controlled media. There are fewer Jews in newsrooms than ever before. And now there are fewer Jews than that. That's happening in other places as well. But the media has lost the trust of this community. So we're not hearing these stories. I want these stories. I want to thank you for giving me your attention and this time here tonight. This has been a real privilege and an honor to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you.